Here we go. Good morning. My name is Billie Powers, and I am about to read an introduction and opening statement for this declaration video. Mortgage Electronic Registration System, Inc., MERS, as the trademark, is the focus of the research that is the foundation of this declaration. Renee, Wyler, and Billie Powers, myself, are registered whistleblowers with the Securities and Exchange Commission, bringing forth the material evidence of findings and proprietary work. We come forward in peace as protectors of the American people, women, and men, the President, the Treasury, and the US Incorporated. We seek remedy for all who are touched by the Ponzi scheme known as the MERS database software. Third parties evade taxes and steal the estates of over 67 million dispossessed families with hidden counterfeit securities, violating the 3 federal crimes detailed in the Constitution: pirating, counterfeiting, and treason. Hundreds of trillions of dollars in fines will heal America as criminals face lifetimes in prison and even potentially death. The evidence of MERS counterfeiting of securities in unrecorded transaction on Citus is massive. Evidence that employees of third parties have unlimited access to the MERS database, meaning there are so many third parties with access, the degree of theft is immeasurable. The result of these hidden transactions are counterfeit securities taking homes, laundering money, human trafficking on paper, and our financial crimes against humanity. The material evidence led to the involvement and conflict of interest of public servants, to include attorney generals, FBI agents, judges, sheriffs, police, and even the local municipalities at large. The conflict of interest is deep. Entire neighborhoods share hidden MERS MIN numbers, lenders, and servicers. Judges appear to be insulated as their neighbors around them share MIN numbers. FBI agents appear to get sweetheart deals buying REO properties as reconveyances void their obligations, and even schools said to be debt-free by the SEC Internal Legal Department are loaded with MIN numbers attached. The evidence backing this video is available to law enforcement who are involved currently with Wyler and myself in investigations. The DOJ and SEC are said to be partying with their investigations. The video declaration is for Congress, SEC, DOJ, FBI et al. In support of these open investigations we women have with these agencies. We call the MERS MIN number database a Ponzi scheme of mass proportion using unrecorded MIN numbers attached to counterfeit securities through manipulated Citus identifiers, stealing the land, home, and lives of the American homeowners and their families. The hundreds of trillions of dollars, the fines the DOJ, SEC, and IRS et al. May recover would heal America, as lifetimes in prison, again, even death, await the criminals. Now what I'd like to do before Renee and I get started is to explain how we came together and how we met. The third party who introduced us is Bruce Soloway. Bruce, I'd like you to unmute yourself, please, and come on in, introduce yourself, and explain your attachment to MERS Mortgage, Wyler Mortgage, and to us two women.
Well, thank you for the introduction. Yeah, my name is Bruce Soloway. I'm a former sheriff's deputy and a former candidate for sheriff in my county. And I met Renee Wyler some 5 years ago, and together we found that we had a common interest, and so we've stayed in touch all these years and been working together over these years. And I am now currently the Vice President and Chief Fraud Investigator for Wyler Mortgage, and we continue to work to unravel these crimes against humanity.
Can you give us a brief, what was your, you ran for sheriff, I know. Give us a little understanding of that information.
Yeah, I was on the Sheriff's Department for 3 years. I was a captain in the Sheriff's Department, and I ran for sheriff in 2012 of my local county.
Okay, and then how did you and I meet?
Well, you and I had a common friend, and he explained to me what your situation was, and it piqued my interest because it was the same thing that Renee and I were working on. And once I found out that you were a former mortgage broker, as
Okay,
Renee is.
I need to correct you there. I was not a mortgage broker. I had an in-house broker, but we were doing loans and helping sell homes. We were doing real estate loans, etc. So even though I myself was not the broker, I had a broker of record for our office, Powers Development.
And so with Renee's background being a mortgage broker, I knew that we had to get together because she had parts of the puzzle, and you had parts of the puzzle, and with the hundreds of other people that you've been in contact over the years, they all have pieces of the puzzle, and it's all coming together, and we're uncovering the frauds.
Wonderful. Well, Bruce, thank you for bringing us together, because from the second you did, Renee and I have been pretty much connected at the hip, drawing results and bringing the database, learning how the situs manipulation is so key. So we're going to go ahead and have you mute, and we're going to start now. Renee's going to do her introduction, and then I'll do mine, and we'll continue on. Go ahead, Renee.
Okay, I'm going to be reading from an actual audit that I performed on a property, and this will give you a lot of my information. I have trademarked a MERS mortgage fraud audit. It's called a Wyler 1 MERS mortgage fraud audit. And so I'll begin with this affidavit. AIA period Renee Wyler, the president of Wyler Mortgage Group, LLC, an Ohio active limited liability company, do hereby certify that the following searches of Mortgage Electronic Registration Systems, Inc.'s database are true and accurate. That in 2017, I alerted both Chief Jane Norberg of the SEC and Maria Rieger, senior attorney for the Comptroller of the Currency's Office, of a catastrophic breach of the MERS database being perpetrated by unknown person or persons who has or have access by way of user ID and password to the Mortgage Electronic Registration System, Inc.'s database, and that this theft/harvesting of data involves the identities of potentially millions of mortgagors and non-mortgagors, including sitting judges and U.S. attorneys. That I, as whistleblower TCR 1396287669244, alerted Jane Norberg, Chief of the Securities and Exchange Commission, of the multiple counterfeit mortgage accounts being registered in the MERS database on entire streets throughout the United States of America, including probate judge Larry Nelson's property located in Leelanau County, Michigan, as well as Leelanau County Sheriff Michael Borkovich's property in Traverse City, Michigan. I found the same pattern of fraud on the property being occupied by the Orange County Sheriff's Office in California, and on a property believed to be owned by Judge David O. Carter in Orange County, California, who is the judge in Powers versus the Bank of New York Mellon, case number 817-CV01386, and that I have documented overwhelming evidence of mortgage fraud/Ponzi scheme having been perpetrated by MERS and its bank privies. This evidence is posted on my Facebook page under the group Whistleblower's Diary. That my affidavit as whistleblower has been filed with the court in the case of Powers versus the Bank of New York Mellon, and provides evidence of multiple undisclosed, unrecorded counterfeit shadow mortgages, which I refer to as UCSM, accounts that have been registered on multiple addresses on the Ortega Highway in San Juan Capistrano, California. All properties appear to share mortgage accounts. That these UCSM accounts are being hidden or concealed in plain sight in the MERS public database, but require knowledge of a secret algorithm that includes different versions of the addresses. Google Plus codes have not been used in any of my searches and may reveal multiple additional mortgages on properties with the Google Plus code identifiers. Also suspect is MBLU address identifiers, map block lot unit. I have not searched the MERS database for these property identifiers on individual property addresses, except the ones currently being used on utility boxes and cell phone towers. I do have evidence that both utility boxes and cell phone towers appear to have their own addresses and have been registered in MERS with specific street addresses, identifiers, and mortgage accounts registered on them in MERS, each having its own specific mortgage identification number, or MIN, that I believe Google to be a conduit of the fraud being perpetrated by MERS. That I verified that the UCSM accounts do not appear to be registered in the MERS database on the address of the White House, the U.S. Treasury building, the Smithsonian, but do appear on the Ronald Reagan federal buildings, both in Santa Ana, California, and in Washington, D.C. Judge David O. Carter is aware of my affidavit on the fake mortgage accounts that appear in MERS on the Ronald Reagan federal building in Santa Ana, California. Judge Carter is also aware of the fake mortgage accounts that have been registered in MERS on the Santa Ana High School, the Santa Ana Zoo, and 2 mortgage accounts shared by the Ronald Reagan Federal Building and the Velvet Lounge Bar in Santa Ana, California. That I have furnished plaintiff Mohan Harihar, Supreme Court Case Appeal Number 171381, with my correspondence requesting an investigation by the U.S. Attorney for Detroit, Matthew Schneider, of the fraud that I have revealed. In my MERS audits on 2 of my neighbors' properties, both are former U.S. attorneys for Detroit. One former U.S. attorney personally verified with me that he did not have a mortgage on his property, despite the fact that he had multiple active mortgage accounts registered in MERS on his particular address in Leelanau County, Michigan. That my preliminary investigation appears to reveal that the U.S. Attorney for Detroit, Matthew Schneider, seems to have immunity from the MERS fraud on a property that I believe to be his personal residence in Saline, Michigan. His neighbors, however, do not appear to have this privilege on their properties on the street where his property appears to be located. That I believe the current sitting judge, Catherine A. Bacall, to have the same type of fraudulent mortgage accounts registered on what I believe to be a property, and I posted this on my Facebook page, MERS Mortgage Fraud, Judges with MERS Mortgages, dated January 18, 2019, and posted at 11:39. I go on to say this is actually a audit for Lena Hanahan, who is a property owner. I go on to say that I believe I have evidence that identity theft involving my personal name, social security number, and address were also harvested by someone having access by way of user ID and password to the MERS database. That I performed numerous audits of MERS and have demonstrated the data mining capabilities of MERS, and I believe MERS and its members privies to have perpetrated the largest catastrophic breach of mortgage borrowers' personal information ever. Please see Facebook Whistleblower's Diary.
And you need to declare, please, under penalty of perjury?
I declare under penalty of perjury that this information is true and accurate.
Okay, and you are?
And I'm Renee Wyler.
Okay. My name is Billie Renee Francis Lillian Powers. I am coming forth as a whistleblower, TCR with the Securities and Exchange Commission, TCR number 1495145702651, filed in May of 2017. Also, TCR in September 20th, 2013, TCR 1377706878219. I'm also piggybacking this information in its entirety into Wyler's TCR with the Securities and Exchange Commission, number 13967669244, which she declared filing in March 2014. The last I'm going to be declaring on today, but not to exclude any others existing, is with the IRS on 9/27/2013. I piggyback on Carol Keene in our MetLife claims of the buy, sell, sell, buy, number 2013-002529, within which case she also clarified the hidden database and shadow dockets attaching identities to the warrants and cituses identifiers. So with this going forward, I have a previous, I've given up my NMLS license due to the fact that there is so much fraud in recording and in documents. And through my years of dealing with all of the servicers, as I had a modification company called Keep the Roof in 2008 and 2009, that company dealt with all of the servicers and all of the lenders. As we created files to send to these companies, Countrywide, Bank of America, US Bank, etc., it became very quickly known that things were missing. We were resending. And as we're resending, we're also resending identifiers. We're also resending our children, our families' information. So I declare under penalty of perjury in California, as I am a Californian on the land here, our republic, and the United States Incorporated and the United States. Everywhere you can declare, I am declaring that the information I'm bringing forth is to the best of my ability true and factual. And the material evidence must be adjudicated, and there must be indictments brought, as our goal is to shut down these database software systems that are destroying our titles and our land ownership in America, and actually internationally as well. Okay, first of all, now that we've declared, and we are doing this for very reasons for law enforcement, I'm going to read this to you because Renee and I agree on this. There should be no reason for two mothers, grandmothers, to do this much work for the DOJ and their underlings. We have a duty to report what we find, and the agencies have the duty to investigate and indict, fully investigate. We feel this is a nice present we're bringing, wrapped in a pretty bow for those making their paycheck to do this. Renee and I are not making a paycheck to do this. There is no money being exchanged hand. Renee is not making money doing these audits. I'm not making any money doing this research. So for myself, 12 years of this, and Renee, countless years of this, thousands of hours. It is our prayer that those who are supposed to be doing this investigation will come forth with us, take this information, and expand on it. Because there are hundreds of trillions of dollars to be earned in fines and levied, and countless indictments to come down. So with that said, as we go forward, it is important to explain that the CITES identifiers used in these audits are federally attached. So this is important to know. Addresses are being manipulated. That's what the CITES is about. The CITES attaches the property to federal jurisdiction because of the zip code. Zip codes are being manipulated to give multiple jurisdictions, corner lots, layering of properties. All of this comes forward in our evidence of what we're finding for law enforcement to investigate. First of all, Congress, Maxine Waters, Congresswoman Waters, and I have had discussions. I'm also dealing, now we have Congressman Levin in San Juan Capistrano and other congressmen and women involved. They've been given this information and evidence, and Waters actually spoke to me for over a half hour in April and stated she was going to be looking into the information I sent. She stated she was only going to research my case, but for those interested parties, hundreds of you who have come forward, you're in that case. Renee Wyler is in that case. Bruce Soloway is in that case. Everyone in this country is attached to Powers versus Bank of New York Mellon. And the key TAM of Brashear versus the United States, which is showing the tax evasion and the depth of the tax evasion attached to these CITUS identifiers, is also going forward. And all of us, again, on this video, are included in that key TAM, as every homeowner in America is. So be it known that the two first impression cases of Powers versus Bank of New York Mellon and Brashear versus the United States are where this key evidence has already started to be presented, and we're going to go forward. I'm going to explain real quickly. May 2019, there was an article. MERS owner, International Exchange, which is ICE, their acronym, is buying Simplifile for $335 million. ICE has bought MERS. That deal came just over 2 years after ICE acquired a majority stake in MERS Corp. Now hear that, there's two different things, MERS Corp and MERS. The owner of Mortgage Electronic Registration System and operator of the MERS system. Two different systems there. A national electronic registry that tracks the changes in servicing rights and beneficial ownership interest in US-backed mortgages. The way Simplifile works is it acts as an electronic liaison. Bruce, can you please mute yourself? The way Simply Life works is it acts as an electronic liaison between lenders, settlement agents.
Where are you going to be?
Bruce, you need to mute yourself. Bruce, please mute yourself. Bruce, mute yourself. Thank you. The way Simplifile works is it acts as an electronic liaison between lenders, settlement agents, and county recording offices, streamlining the local recording of residential mortgage transactions. Simplifile is also a 2019 HW Tech 100 winner as one of the top technology companies in the housing industry. This is important as the electronic recordation systems are the foundation of the recording fraud into the land records across America. It is where any and all mortgages are to be recorded, and why the information brought forth in these audits is monumental to property ownership. When MERS is in place using a digital tracking system that is hiding transaction from the records, tax evasion is just one clear crime. Using the identities, CITUS, and identifiers of the US citizens in order to pirate the Treasury is a crime so high on the high seas that death is the constitutional answer to the crime. Preliminary audits done on the principles of ICE and Simplifile with the same findings listed in presentment today are on record with Renee and I already. We've done our research on many of the principles, and to say what we're finding is simply egregious and treason to this country is an understatement. So, first of all, as far as regarding the Simplifile, which you heard is detrimental to digital recording, Kamala Harris in 2013, CJ Holmes of Homeowners for Justice provided evidence of recording of counterfeit securities during her Harris's reign as Attorney General in California. These 18 cases of recordation fraud and documentation crimes, counterfeit securities, 18 cases. CJ Holmes was promised an investigation. Harris ignored the evidence, and her deputy attorney generals admitted to the fact no investigation was done as promised in 2014 when I reached out to their office, and so did Jed Davis. In 2014, I gave Deputy Attorney General of California, Leslie Westmoreland, the fact that I had found CITUS manipulation throughout the real estate sites, Zillow, Realtor.com, etc., based on my proprietary information of identity. The situses have been manipulated and created within these systems to appear to be homes, to appear to be cul-de-sacs, appear to be communities of which mortgages are attached, these counterfeit securities. Leslie Westmoreland asked me how many I had. And I said, well, hundreds on myself alone. But then you multiply that by each and anyone who has ever autographed a document for what they believe to be a mortgage or a loan, not just a mortgage, but car loans, etc. CUSIP numbers are created. MERS MIN numbers don't have to necessarily mean they're being attached to mortgages as we believe them to be. So Leslie Westmoreland asked me, I gave him evidence, and it went nowhere. There's more information regarding that, but this declaration today is about the MIN numbers. Matthew Snyder in 2019 is very key, and Renee is going to discuss that. Know that Kamala Harris, we have pulled audit on her. We're not going to go into that today because I've asked Renee not to speak of that today because there's potential litigation coming forward that I am leading with the California 18 and other homeowners against Kamala Harris herself and as Attorney General and Senator of this country. Remember, she also let Steve Mnuchin off with nothing for having stolen 36,000 homes that they could record in California, another one of which was mine. So Renee, let's get started. Just talk about Kamala Harris quickly without giving any information, but let them know that you have started preliminary audits just for this declaration purpose.
Yes, I have audited the home of what I believe to be Kamala Harris. And I believe her husband, Doug Emhoff, to have ownership in that property.
Okay.
And we found some anomalies there.
And it's amazing what we are finding. So now let's go on to our number 2 Attorney General. Now remember, this doesn't mean that all the others aren't involved. We are just presenting this case today as evidence of what we're finding to be the pattern. All Attorney Generals, all public servants that we are working audits on and going forward with are finding very specific patterns. So Renee, let's talk about Matthew Snyder, please, and give an explanation of who he is, how you met him, what your relationship there is.
I really don't have a relationship with him other than I asked for an investigation into what I was finding on 2 of my neighbors who happen to be former U.S. attorneys. One of them told me, and I had a conversation with him, and I'm not going to mention his name right now, but he told me that I don't have a mortgage, Renee, on my home. I own this free and clear, and I showed him all the active mortgages that were registered on his property in MERS that were specific to his address. I also did an audit on a neighbor a couple houses down from where I live right now. He is also a former U.S. attorney, and he has multiple mortgages that do not reconcile with the courthouse records. So what we have here is we have records recorded at the courthouse and records in MERS not matching up.
Okay.
They don't reconcile.
And now we do know that other attorney generals have actually sued MERS. We know that other agencies have sued MERS and come forward. We know that the evidence that they find are not all being declared to us as well, but that there is no corner of this country that you and I especially can find that cannot know that this situs manipulation is happening, even though, well, first of all, because we've told them, but they know that these transactions are hidden because that's one of the key elements of the lawsuits. So hiding transactions, but what our proprietary information is brought into us, that they're manipulating the situs identifiers, which is federal identifiers. Okay, so we're going to get on now to our second segment of this, which is about judges. And we're going to first talk about Judge Powers, 13th Judicial Circuit Court of Michigan judge, and who you sent a letter to in October of 2017. Now, I would like you to take us back to that and explain why you sent the letter and what became of that and what happened to you, please?
Well, I found that my property was sharing mortgages in MERS with the neighbors. For instance, my address was 781 Shetland Trail, and there was a mortgage showing up as active that should have been, or that was actually recorded on 567 East Shetland Trail. And I documented that. I confirmed that with Quicken Loans. They said, no, that should not be on your property. It should be on 567. But yet there it was when I did a search using a certain version of the address. There was the Quicken active mortgage. So I started doing other different versions of my address and came up with 2 other active mortgages. And these mortgages were showed up. The note dates showed up right after my identity was stolen in April of 2017. So what I did is I wrote a letter to Thomas G. Power. He is the circuit judge at the 13th Judicial Circuit in Leelanau County. And my attorney had told me that, you know, he hates what the banks have done, and he is a man of integrity. And so I wrote him a letter. He was not involved in any lawsuit. I wrote him a letter and said, this is what I'm finding. I gave him my letter to Jane Norberg and my letter to Maria Rieger, and he wrote me back and said that the only additional action I would recommend is to bring it to the attention of local law enforcement to consider whether criminal acts have occurred. I've taken the liberty to referring your material to the Leelanau County Prosecuting Attorney Office for their possible review. And that was the end of it.
And were you ever contacted by the district attorney's office there?
No.
Okay. No. Have you reached out to try and talk to them?
I actually did an audit on the sheriff's.
Okay, my question was, did you actually reach out to talk to the district attorney's office?
Well, I have a background with the attorney's office, with the prosecutor, because he helped me prosecute someone who was pretending to modify mortgages on behalf of Bank of America. They took over $16,000 of mortgage payments from my loan officer.
So what's key here is you have had a relationship with the district attorney's office.
But this is not something that
is not something that they picked up. You've had no correspondence with it. So this is a pattern. Right. They tend to, these district attorney's offices tend to handle things for us if we come forth with small or with cockroach level problems. But as far as us bringing the kingpin, which is usually who these agencies want, for some reason we don't get them to help. And I know for myself with the district attorney's office here in Orange County, I just recently sent another backup of documentation of which I CC'd many, including all the whistleblowing offices on, and have not had one correspondence back as yet. So why? Because this is the magnitude of the Ponzi scheme. There are things that you and I probably do not know, because we can admit we don't. There's things that these computers hold that we can't see. So the district attorney's offices, the FBI offices, they can see things we can't. And yet, we're not getting the assistance in the indictments that were being promised. So no communication further regarding your information sent to Judge Power. And can you tell me what happened? Let's go on to number 2, Judge Nelson. In November 30th of 2017, your information regarding that.
I did an audit on his street, and it was my friends said, hey, I want you to look at our homes and see if we have any these shadow mortgages on our homes. And there are 2 friends live on the same road as Judge Nelson. In fact, one of them told me, oh, well, Judge Nelson lives right down the road from me. So I did an audit on the street, and I picked up Judge Nelson's address. It looked as though, when I did the audit, all of the addresses on the section of this road share, well, at the time, 6 active mortgages. And so I knew that there was a parcel owned by the Sleeping Bear National Lakeshore that was also on that road. So I did an audit on the Sleeping Bear National Lakeshore parcel, and sure enough, it had 6 active mortgages on it that it shared with the judges, or the judge, and with my 2 friends. So I began going down the entire street, I didn't do the entire street, but I did a big section of the street and found the same thing. But that was not where it ended. There were still other mortgages showing up, depending on which version of the address I put on, or I put into the search. So I wrote a letter to the judge and I said, hey, I think your information has been, hacked into. I believe there's some fraud going on here, and no response whatsoever.
Okay, and you let him know, correct? You let Judge Nelson know that you had a case in front of Judge Elsenheimer?
Elsenheimer, I did, yes.
And what became of that? What happened to you as a result of that?
When we had a hearing, and at the time I revealed, this was the first time I made it all public, what was going on in MERS.
And when was that?
I believe it was January of 2000, I'm going to say 2017.
Okay, so in January you made it public in front of Judge Elsenheimer. And then follow forward to November 30th of 2017, you contacted Judge Nelson, the probate judge. So, okay, go ahead forward with us and explain what happened with Elsenheimer.
So I was sanctioned. He said this was a frivolous business, that my case was all frivolous. And
what was your case? And explain what your case was in general.
My case is basically that the note that my company originated was never transferred. It was a Fannie Mae note that was never transferred to Fannie Mae. This Fannie Mae document, and I have the original certified copy with the title attorney's signature on there, with a delivery receipt to my Cincinnati office, with that 3-page document that verifies that that note was never transferred, because later we see, in court cases, we see allonges being added to it. The first allonge did not have any endorsements. Michelle Scholander, we're all familiar with Michelle, her double-stamped endorsement was on the second version, but they forgot to put it on the first version. And there were 2 different court cases showing, okay, this is what they did this is the one they submitted to.
So what we have is multiple allonges submitted. And what we also have regarding that is our whistleblower with McCarthy and Holthus, who clearly states on her declaration with Jack Sutty that they create allonges from templates, or they can pull them from other files. So we know that what you showed this judge, Judge Elsenheimer, was material facts. You had material facts that were in evidence that were unrefuted affidavit-wise by any other party. So you have superior claim as far as what you brought to the court. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And I filed a motion for him to preserve the evidence in MERS. That motion was ignored.
Okay, so now what we have is you have presented Judge Elsenheimer with MERS manipulation and material facts showing that your company was used under forgeries using your company name. And yet Judge Elsenheimer, in lieu of helping you, brings sanctions against you because of your MERS audit that you did, which you believe is his MERS audit on his home. Is that my correct finding from what you're stating?
No, at that time I had not completed the audit on his home. I had presented the audit on Judge Nelson's home and had shown that I had contacted the SEC and the OCC with these mortgages showing up on entire streets.
And what did he say about that, about the other agencies? Did he mention any of that on the record with you?
No.
Okay, so let's move on. We've got another interesting case and a judge. Now, what we're giving today is preliminary. We're not giving all the facts, but what we're giving is the fact that we have the facts and they are in evidence and they are secured and we have them available for law enforcement with this declaration. But these patterns we're finding, it only takes a pattern of 3 that should pull an investigation, from what I was told by Deputy Attorney General David Payman and Leslie Westmoreland himself out of California back in 2014. What we're going to talk about now is a case of Heather Singleton. She's a single woman, and another plaintiff versus West Valley Enterprises, a Washington corporation, Mortgage Electronic Recordation System, Inc., US Bank NA et al. Now I'm going to hold this document up in front. I believe it's backwards because of the way this is filming. But why this is important is because as we're talking about judges, we talk about their conflict of interest with MERS, because you cannot have judges holding all of these different min numbers on their properties and reconveyances, not settling with the county records that we pull, and yet these judges seem to have a pattern of abuse against we homeowners. Heather Singleton's declaration, I will include in our YouTube link. I will put it in the comments. Her declaration, it's called Declaration of Heather Singleton in support of motion to disqualify pro tempore Mason County Superior Court Judge Dalton. And the reason being, and I'll just surmise, and you can read the declaration in the link, is that Scott Staffney, her attorney, also has ADA, American Disabilities Act issues. So he only does his court cases per court call. Heather Singleton also has an ADA advocate that appeared with her in court with Scott on the line. What Heather's declaration clearly states is that there was bias from the judge, there was yelling at her in the courtroom from the judge, and that her symptomatic PTSD, et cetera, were triggered, and the judge acted inappropriately by silencing Scott Staffney and then telling in part to Heather that she should get another attorney, that there were other attorneys out there that handle homeowners, and that judge also stated that Scott Staffney was incorrect, even though he was 3 generations attorney. He didn't know what he was talking about. So I encourage everyone to read the declaration, because in full it takes too long. But we're going to go into, I asked Renee to help do a Wyler's MERS audit on Judge Dalton. And Scott is a friend of mine now. He's a Washington State attorney. And Renee, will you explain what we found on Judge Dalton, please?
Yes. We found, I believe there are 4 active accounts. There's 10 accounts total, I believe. When putting Husky in the street field, we pull an active Caliber Home Loans mortgage dated 11/20/2012. We also find an inactive First Federal Savings and Loan mortgage from 2015. If we put Husky Lane and we just do Husky LN, we get 2 active mortgages, one from Round Point, actually 2 from Round Point. Round Point Mortgage Services, one 5/2017, and then another in 5/11/2017. Both are showing as active, as is the Caliber Loans mortgage, so that's 3. Then we have a Freedom Mortgage inactive account as well. If we put Northeast, NE, Husky Lane, spell lane out, we will find another active mortgage from Boeing Employees Credit Union. That is dated 4/26/16. Plus we have 3 inactive accounts here, JP Morgan, Bank of America, and another Bank of America. If we put Northeast Husky Lane and we abbreviate Lane, LN, on that same address, we're going to get a Bank of America inactive mortgage. So as you can see, by putting different versions of the address on Judge Dalton's specific address, we're finding 4 active mortgages and a total of 10 or 6 inactive mortgages. And that's just a very preliminary audit. If I spent some more time on it, I'm sure I could come up with some other things. But you can see how these different versions of the address will pull different mortgage accounts. And what's crazy about it is she's got 4 active mortgages on her home. I don't think so. So the next...
You're speaking of the 4 active mortgages appearing on Judge Dalton, correct?
Right, on Judge Dalton's address. And then, so we'll need to go look at the courthouse to see where the active mortgage is. Is there really a recorded mortgage on this property?
Well, again, as we have stated before, you and I in conversation, having done loans before, you're being a mortgage broker, we know that prior to anything being approved, there can only be one in first position.
Exactly.
So we're showing in the MERS database these hidden transactions that are appearing to be first deeds of trust. How is that even possible? It's not lawfully. So we have documents of potential criminal aspects in pretending to all be first trust deeds. And then we have reconveyances, and a reconveyance means it's gone now, or they go inactive in MERS, which means they're gone. So with these judges, it's very key that there is a conflict of interest. They should not be ruling on any case that has MERS involvement, which in this country, we know that the securities are all tied in through MERS numbers usually. We do have people who can say they can't find a MERS attachment, but yet they're securitized and it's running through the MERS system. So there's a complete conflict there of these judges. So the next thing we're going to do is I also want to make clear, and you too, we've said this, Heather's declaration we've read. And I said, oh my God, I can relate exactly to what she's saying, to the bias. And how about yourself, Renee?
There is just not a motion that you can file that they will even entertain. I have given I just filed a motion of fraud on the court. They took, the attorney for Orleans and Associates took the mortgage documents and blacked out the MIN number. Why did he black out the MIN number? Because I have linked that MIN number to the Fannie Mae approval. So my company has been able to find the actual approval from Fannie Mae showing that this Fannie Mae note and Fannie Mae mortgage was being sold to Fannie Mae, but somehow Fannie Mae is nowhere to be found in the chain of title. And so what do? They blacked out the MIN number on the mortgage and filed it with the courts. They also blacked out the Huntington number that showed that Huntington was planning to sell that or was supposed to sell that loan to Fannie Mae. And my document, the internal loan approval, had that number on it. So now they're going back and redacting the MIN and the number that ties it to Fannie Mae, and they filed it in court. And so the next thing you know, the attorney says he's withdrawing from the case. The attorney that perpetrated this fraud is just, withdrawing from the case, and I objected. And they're not going to even entertain that. He can just leave after he has committed fraud, and he can leave the case.
Okay. And now what's key here is that our whistleblower from McCarthy and Holthus discussed the fact with us that MIN numbers are redacted. Like Bank of America, we were told through this whistleblower that the MIN numbers were required to be redacted, any of the identifiers. And when I asked, I said, well, why is that? It was said, well, they said it's proprietary, it's private. Well, you and I know the MIN numbers are not private. They're supposed to be recorded into this system. So what you just stated, and I'm going to clarify this now, from what I've heard from our whistleblower under testimony, without comprehending why really, I knew there had to be another reason. What it is because now we know from what you just said those identifiers will also lead them back to other agencies who are involved.
Well, exactly. The Fannie Mae, the promissory note is service marked. It's an interest first note, and it is a proprietary form for Fannie Mae. Gotcha. Nobody can use that form. That's why they needed to redact the MIN number. And
and we'll get into this further, but this is tying another dot, connecting another dot for us. The next we're going to talk about, and is really key to my life, is Judge Carter. And I'm just going to read a little paragraph here. On the record, Judge Carter called himself the sledgehammer against the fraud and called my case of Powers versus Bank of New York Mellon compensable, as he strongly stated he would refer any fraud I proved to him to the U.S. Attorney General. He called himself the sledgehammer. After bringing him the material facts and evidence, the case of criminal joinder he termed a first impression case, not only did Judge Carter ignore the material evidence, but he ordered the clerk to destroy evidence of crimes presented by countless parties calling themselves interested parties, and later ruled against me with prejudice in a 40-plus page decision full of what I know are false statements and fraud upon the court. What we have found in our research of Judge Carter is that he has a direct conflict of interest to his situs and its manipulation in its connection to MERS. My case is on federal appeal. Again, the information that Renee created on my property on the Ortega Highway, previously known as 40701 Ortega Highway, San Juan Capistrano, unincorporated, 92675. Though the address situs used in all the documentation connecting it to any MERS number that I can find is not only manipulated, but in the documents they attempted to have stolen my home with, the zip code is wrong. So they gave zip code jurisdiction to the Riverside Sheriff's Department when my property is on Orange County. And I removed the situs, legally removed the situs, and gave notice of it, and have the notice also signed off at the county tax assessor's office. So what I have given is all of that evidence to Judge Carter's court in material facts affidavit form. Nothing I gave was rebutted back in affidavit because none of the attorneys coming forward gave verified complaints that were real. So I asked Renee, we needed to do something on Judge Carter just to see if there was a conflict. And Renee, will you give the preliminary findings of your Wyler audit, please, on Judge Carter?
Yes. We have what we call a pattern of immunity here on Judge Carter's street, which means there is a template on the street that has exceeds, which means that the street has more, each property has more than 20 mortgages hidden in the database that cannot be pulled up. And I'll demonstrate that a little bit later, but what I did first was to look at Catalina, put in Catalina, which is a street he lives on, his address. And this is, when doing this, MERS instructs you to not use any identifiers, okay, just the street name. So East Main Street should be entered as Main. So I just put Catalina in the street field, and we pull up an active Flagstar mortgage that was dated 8/9/2012, which doesn't seem to match up with the courthouse records. I did a second audit, Catalina Street, and I put ST in the street field, and that pulled up something very interesting. It pulled up a WAMU Jacksonville homeside lending mortgage from 1987. So the note date is 4/10/1987. Well, MERS was not created until 1990. Is that correct?
Well, within the 90s, yes. And remember, we have MERS Corp, we have MERS Trademark. Just to clarify, I will be putting in, we have other whistleblowers who came forward and helped us find evidence, or they found evidence that we have used as supporting evidence, such as Ken Dost, regarding the patents and the trademarks. So we have evidence of Bank of America involvement in purchase of MERS, as well as some other entities. So that's going to be in our section of comments that's going to go in there, because it shows the different sale dates, the different acquisitions, patents, trademarks. But 1987, there should not be a MERS transaction showing on Judge Carter's house.
Or anyone's house.
Or anyone's house.
So then this third search was...
And FYI, MERS in California didn't, a different version of MERS didn't record into till the early 2000s, middle 2000s. So even if he does show a MERS MIN number in 1987, MERS of any sort was not even registered to do business in California. So how did it end up on a property in 1987? So go ahead and go forward.
So the third one, I put in for the street address, Catalina Street. And this time I tweak it ever so slightly. I put a period after ST. So it's Catalina ST period. And that will pull up. And notice I must mention that I also zeroed out the street. Oh, no, I'm sorry, not the street. The city and the state field. Because tweaking those can give you different mortgages as well, because the only fields they really require is the zip code and the street number and street address, because they have those fields starred. So when putting Catalina Street ST with a period, that pulls up a Provident Funding mortgage that was paid off or closed in 2012. 8/29 of 2012. So then we'll do another search and we'll put street, STREET, spelled out, and that pulls up 3 closed inactive accounts, 1 with MetLife Home Loans, GMAC, and 1 with a receivership non-asset from Ruston, Virginia, which is very interesting. So where are those in the courthouse records?
And as I went down to the courthouse just a few weeks ago, I pulled everything recorded on an FBI agent involved, on Stephen Daly, who is the attorney presenting himself as for MERS Select Portfolio Servicing. And gosh, he purports to be 3. So anyhow, we pulled county records. And when you correlate the county records with what MERS is showing on their records, there are so many different transactions going on and so many reconveyances and cancellations. And it's almost, it has to be investigated, because it leaves such a door open of questions as to how this is going on. So what we know is Judge Carter, like Judge Dalton, like Judge Elsenheimer, like Judge Power, Power, not Powers, right? Power,
yes.
Yeah, Power. What we know is there is a pattern. Now, these are only 4 judges.
Now, I have not done a fraud audit on Judge Power.
Yeah, preliminarily, though, we just saw
Right.
the same pattern, but an audit has not been done. Renee, when she finishes her audits, does declarations and such and attaches. But what we also know in doing all of this is that the MERS system is live. It's a living database, meaning things can come in, things can go out. Things can be active, things can be inactive. And because the whistleblower explained to us that even her database she could access the MERS database because she had the password. Now, as we all know, and we've discussed, Renee, is that at one point there was 5,500 members of MERS. You take those 5,500 MERS members, and then you go to their sub-employees who have access through the passcode and passwords. You cannot measure how many people are on this system. This is supposed to be a secure system, but we have people who have no mortgage knowledge, no legal knowledge, no real estate knowledge, no high school educations, not even an ability to comprehend what they're entering into these databases, but yet they're doing what their employers tell them to do, and they're going in, changing, and fixing. And when I do say fixing, our whistleblower has stated that her job was to create title where none existed in order to take the homes. So this is very key.
Finish up on Judge Catalina Street.
Go ahead.
We have a vacant lot at 2300 Catalina Street in Laguna Beach. zip code 92651. This lot has never been developed, yet when I did a MERS fraud audit or an audit on this particular property, it comes back with an exceed, which is a message that says the search criteria you entered were too general and the number of mins located exceeds the limit we were able to return to you. Please narrow your search by adding additional information. Well, I pulled up other random addresses on the street and they all have exceeds, except for the judge's property. So he's immune from the exceeds, which are the more than 20 mortgages that have been registered on that particular address that are hidden. We don't know how many there are. We can't find out. But we're seeing that I saw the same pattern on Judge Moss's street.
And we're going to get into that next. And you saw that same pattern. And the reason we started finding that was because, as I explained, Carol and I found situs addresses on manholes, on telephone poles, on transformers. Each telephone pole itself has an address that we found. So when you start figuring how many fake addresses, and this is what I told Leslie Westmoreland back in 2014, that we had found this evidence, that is manipulating addresses to give an appearance of standing to mortgage, to loan against, to create transactions, hidden transactions from the land records that really are not even existing in the real world. They're just laundering identities, and that's human trafficking on paper, and it's financial crimes against humanity. So
and let me intervene there, because when I did this audit on Catalina Street, just for fun, I put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in the street number field, and I will get an exceeds. So you can see how they can manipulate those numbers and put an infinite number of mortgages on any particular address. This is a fake address, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
And what it shows is, again, we have no idea how many people are accessing that system. So
exactly.
Here we have MERS Corp being bought by ICE, who is now buying Simplifile for $375 million. Mind you, Simplifile has no debt, but is worth $375 million to purchase. So question, if you have no debt and you're worth $375 million to the ICE Corporation who owns MERS, and MERS Corp has ownership, this is tying internationally every single situs manipulation one can imagine. This is hundreds of trillions, hundreds, thousands. I mean, the amount is infinite as to the amount of fines that can be brought forth for these agencies. Not only does this settle America's debt, it settles the world, because there is no way that any of this is real. So the debt that's been placed on our system as a national debt includes all of this. It includes all of this. Okay, so let's finish up on our judges. Just for today, we're going to just do these judges, but just know that it's an infinite amount of work because every public servant in this country will have conflict of interest at some point as tied to MERS and situs manipulation. The last one we're going to do today is an Orange County judge, Judge Moss. He is the head of the Unlawful Detainer Division. And as those of us who've gone through this debacle of losing our homes to SWAT teams and the RICO comprehend that the unlawful detainer courts are where they take you saying you're a tenant and are being evicted from your own home. So these courts, as in Brashears versus the United States, Faith lays out very clearly the pattern of crimes in using these UD courts unlawfully and unconstitutionally against we homeowners, American men and women. So Renee, let's talk about Judge Moss just a little bit. And he is an Orange County judge in charge of the unlawful detainers.
Well, so you're going to see this kind of the same profile in this fraud audit as you saw with Carter, where he has an immunity on his street. If we take Miramar is the street he lives on,
And now Miramar, I want to explain to people, if you know Newport Beach, California, Miramar is down by what is called the Wedge. And this is some of the highest appraised property in the country. And also, when I was doing a background on this property, I said to Renee, I said, I'm kind of surprised right now. He's only showing paying $10,000 a year in taxes, just under 11. When he did a refi in 2012, that property had to pull over a $2 million appraisal. And so when he shows a refi or a loan in MERS or in the record, and yet he's only paying $11,000 or less in taxes on what is now a $3.6 or $3.1 million home. I can't remember, but
Zillow has it at $2,891,000. So we're really close to $3 million on this property.
Well, on his taxes, on the actual tax assessor's property, his property isn't even showing close to that. So, and it wouldn't be an anomaly if in fact he hadn't refied or done other loans along the way. But when you refi, you have to pull new audits, which then create new tax liability. So this is another pattern we're seeing, is the tax liabilities are kept really low. As we go through these audits and actually do the background of the property's owned, they're paying, like some of them, so little for the property. And even what we see on Judge Carter's property, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't match with law and accounting purposes of properties. So go ahead, Renee.
So my first search is just Miramar, as in MERS would instruct you to do. And then I pull up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inactive mortgages. So these are all been paid off. Dates are 2005, 2012, 2003, 2005, and 2012. So there are 2 in 2012, one from PNC and one from Connecticut Federal Credit Union. We've got Bank of America, JP Morgan, and Wells Fargo. There seems to be a nexus with all of these with Wells Fargo. And if you remember in 2017, Wells Fargo got caught with creating fake checkings accounts, savings accounts, and credit cards using the personal information of their customers. Do you remember that?
Well, I do, because the week before that case started, myself and Chris Winsey, Dr. Chris, did an interview with whistleblower Linda Almonte. And during that interview, I tied my findings of credit card accounts, and Linda clarified that during her declarations and her whistleblowing, it was found that these were all credit card accounts. And then the next week, the hearings start on Wells Fargo. And mind you, we sent our interview to all of the agencies, right up to the president's office. So in between, the Treasury and all of it. And we stated, these are all credit accounts stealing the identities of American homeowners and families. And when Wells Fargo's hearing started, of course, Sloan's admitting, because they have to admit, but they do it in a way that most people wouldn't comprehend what they're saying. It is all based on credit card accounts. In 2011, I noticed and rectified with the phone numbers I was getting sent information from. The phone numbers went to Bank of America's credit card division. So all the faxes I was receiving was coming out of the credit card division. And that's how we started tying that in back in the day. The week before the hearings, we did the release of the show with Linda Almonte. And then, of course, Sloan comes out. And this is not an anomaly either. What Wells Fargo is doing and has done is done across the board in every warehouse, every database, every software system that is presented from all the big banks. And when they did the hearings recently, which is why Waters ended up involved in my case, is because she requested information. At those hearings, this really wasn't held to task. So yes, so identity theft, credit card accounts, yes, unequivocally, that's what they all are, unsecured credit accounts. Go ahead, Renee.
So when we're looking at this audit, there is actually 8 records of paid off inactive mortgages on just this search using Miramar.
With Judge, and we're not putting, we're not sharing the numbers of the address today, and I want to make that clear. We're giving street names, but with the street names come address identifiers. So what Renee has done is use the address identifier and then manipulated as far as a period, a comma, street, lane, spelled out, abbreviated. These create the material fact that evidence shows the site is manipulated is creating transactions on all of these accounts.
Okay, so then we go with Miramar Drive. We're just going to go DR with that. And it'll pick up a PHH mortgage. It's active from 2013. So we'll need to go into the courthouse and see if that is actually a mortgage. But it is showing as active, and the note date is 2/22/2013.
13?
13. And that's PHH. And we've seen that on Judge Elsenheimer. We saw that on my attorney, actually. And we saw an inactive PHH mortgage on Judge Nelson as well.
Mm-hmm. And remember, we also saw correlation with
other ones were correlated too as well.
Ones, including even the address of McCarthy and Holthus when we pulled that and you did an audit, which we're not going to go into today. We saw the correlation with that connected to MERS min numbers out of Michigan. So, so Judge Moss, who is heading the unlawful detainer courts, has more conflict of interest sitting right there.
Well, let me go on to include his neighbors. Okay, so I just pulled out some random neighbors, and I use Miramar Drive, DR, and they all pull exceeds, meaning there's more than 20 mortgages on each one of their neighbors' addresses. So he doesn't have that on his.
Again, insulated from the connection.
Insulated. And then lastly, I put in to demonstrate the template on the entire street. I put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and that pulls exceeds as well.
Okay. All righty. Well, that is concluding just the judges segment today. We're going to go briefly now into FBI agents. And the reason this is a key department too is because these are the agencies we go into and bring our evidence that and I have a declaration that went with my evidence of dereliction of duty and obstruction of justice for one Thomas Ritz, Orange County head of mortgage fraud division. Mind you, I met him in 2012, and for 19 months led me to believe he was investigating. And when we found out, because Jack Suddy was contacted, asked to call him when I was attacked in the county land records office by 3 sheriffs, Jack Suddy spoke with Thomas Ritz at length. And when it was reported back to me that not only did Thomas Ritz not do an investigation, he laughed at all the hundreds of pages I would continually send him over the 19 months. Since he proved himself not to be doing his duty to help, and I was continuing to be hurt, I started doing a little research on him. And what I found out that Thomas Ritz was living undercover as a millionaire in Newport Beach for multiple years in order to do a sting operation. Fancy cars, fancy home, fancy dinners. And in the end, in 2012, what happened is on the arrest, it was a minister, and it ended up being like $100,000 and short indictment. So why do we go years, like up to 5 years, having this man undercover, hobnobbing with all of those who are committing these crimes, and then the case ends with less than $100,000 being mentioned and very short jail time. And yet he is working 19 months, telling me he's working on the recording fraud because he refused to look at the counterfeit securities, but told me if I could show him recording fraud into the land records, documents forged or anything going into the land records, that he would investigate. So fast forward, here we sit today still, and we pulled an audit on FBI agent Thomas Ritz in Orange County. Turns out he lived not very far from me and continues to be in my realm. So I question, because of how many times, and all of us experienced this, We're followed by darkened out windows. We're followed by cars at all hours of the night and day. Our family is followed. So now when you find out that these men and women are actually very close neighbors, you have to concern yourself with even further with your safety. So what did we find on Thomas Ritz preliminarily?
Okay, I'm going to pull this right from the whistleblower's diary where I posted this. It was posted on May 19th at 1:55 p.m. Wyler 1 MERS mortgage fraud audit reveals that FBI Special Agent Thomas Ritz has many mortgage accounts on a property that appears to be his. Notice that just adding a period to drive, period, in the street field will pull up an active Nation Star mortgage account. Who funded this account? Wells Fargo is also in the mix. This is getting very predictable. Look at the last one and exceeds too many concealed mortgages for the MERS database to pull up.
And
this
what we found,
mortgage fraud will never be investigated.
yeah, and this is why when I went to the land records and pulled the land records, of which I took pictures and sent you, the land records show that in 2013, which is right in the middle of the 19-month that he was supposed to be investigating, he actually was spending time getting a mortgage and reconveyances on his property. So here I'm coming forward, begging for help, begging to be protected when I'm being attacked by sheriffs, and bringing the evidence he told me to bring. And yet here he is out getting mortgages. And that was in the land records. But yet the land records don't correlate with the MERS MIN number accounts so that we're finding. So again, Thomas Ritz seems to be playing with the banks and harming us by obstructing justice in the long run. This is what it appears to be, and which is why, like you said, how can we get justice and how can we get investigations when in fact the investigators are the ones that we are having to investigate?
Exactly. So now we're having to investigate them. And we can end on Special Agent Larry Stewart, and I'm going to pull up his audit that I posted on Whistleblower's Diary on May 19th at 1:10 p.m. And I put, this appears to be the home of FBI agent or Special Agent Larry Stewart, who seems to have purchased a Fannie Mae foreclosure. Notice the active JP Morgan Chase account that doesn't seem to reconcile with the Grand Traverse Register of Deeds. Who funded the JP Morgan Chase account appearing in MERS on this property? So it just gives us enough of a red flag on both of these for someone to investigate, and we're the ones that have to investigate this fraud. Now, this agent was investigating two things. He was supposed to be investigating a Fannie Mae transfer of a loan that ended up in Seawalt in a private label securitization, did not go to Fannie Mae. So that was what the mortgage assignment that he was supposed to be investigating. And yet he bought a Fannie Mae home, and he did not disclose this to me. Had he disclosed it, I would have found another agent too.
And remember, what you're talking about is called an REO purchase, right, which is a foreclosure. He purchased a foreclosed property.
He did. And this is also the agent that was tasked with investigating the forgery of someone pretending to be my vice president and signing a mortgage assignment and recording it in Hamilton County, Ohio.
And you proved to him that this person did not work for you, that you didn't know who they were, that they weren't registered with your company, and yet he did nothing.
No, he told me that I should call my title companies because he didn't see a crime here. There was no intent to forge a document. No intent to forge and record a document. So he told me I should go to the title companies and check with them. I did check with the title companies, and they would not return my calls. They run from this one.
Okay, and being that you mentioned title company, this is really another important issue, is that title company and title insurance is to protect us from anything that is on record prior to our purchasing of property.
Of public record.
Of public record. So this is how these title companies are getting around all of this, because if these were recorded on public record, the title companies would have accountability under our title policy. Mm-hmm. And now, but they still do, because now we can go back and find that even though this wasn't on public record, it should have been, and now the fraud from it has stolen our home. So regardless of how you look at this, we should be getting representation by these title companies to protect our title, because we have a duty to protect our title. It's our responsibility.
But the title companies have a way out. They have a loophole in Schedule B of any title insurance policy. It basically says, if it's not in the public record, we're not going to cover it. So,
okay, but public record doesn't clarify public land records. So therefore, in the public record of MERS, which publicly you can get into, and once you know how to use the database, as we figured out, you do find it. So technically,
it's now public record.
It's public record, and the title companies do have a responsibility to us. I know Commonwealth Land Title, I started back with them way back in 2012, and they did everything they could not to help me. Still to this day in court, they've committed fraud upon the court, and I even put in a notice of request or notice to have them perform under my title policy, because it's there. But what we do know too is that the title companies, and I have this from a title attorney who confirmed it with me, they are told to deny, deny, deny.
Well, I actually recorded my counterfeit mortgages that are still showing as active. I have 3 that are still showing as active in MERS, and I went and recorded them. Well,
but it doesn't matter, because if the dates are showing prior to your purchase, which like on my home, there's many showing during the time of me having my home since July 2nd of 2007, which by the way was a date late for them being the MERS or Bank of New York Mellon or anybody to do any assignments, because July 1 was the cutoff date. But nobody wants to hear that either. Nobody thinks any of that is, but it's under contract law. This is all very specific. So what we have found in these MERS audits is a direct correlation with hidden transactions from the record, which again, remind you, the agencies have brought lawsuits based on this very fact alone. So there is no agency out there that can deny what we are bringing forth and the way we're bringing forth this evidence. You have never heard, though, them talk about the manipulation of the situs, which is very, very key to what our proprietary information has found. I want to move on now, if we can, from Larry Stewart. And again, dereliction of duty, obstruction of justice. We have been told through documentation from cases of the United States doing that the FBI in 2014, the Inspector General's office put out a report that said the FBI and Attorney General's office never did investigations that were brought forth. Never. So that is the Inspector General of the United States putting that out as well. So what we're going to finish up with on the audits are 2 more things. One is schools and then courthouses. So we're going to talk real quickly first about the school termed now the Make America Great Again hat school, because of all the controversy that came out from the child that had the Make America Great Again hat on. This is Perry High School in Gilbert, Arizona, and the address is 1919 East Queen Creek Road, Gilbert, Arizona. If you will discuss your FOIA request to Mark Sifoff, or how you're going to explain and go further into what you found on that school.
So this time, well, I've been finding mortgages on schools all around the country. So what I did is when the MAGA school was in the news media, I decided to do an audit on that school and send it directly to, for a FOIA request to the SEC. If I just sent it as just evidence, they're not going to do anything with it. But if you do a FOIA, they may actually honor your FOIA. So that's what I did. And I sent it to the principal too. So I showed all the active mortgages. And I said, you know, what's going on? Why does this school have active mortgages on it? And I did it in a FOIA format. And he came back and said, no, this school does not have any mortgages on it. And I checked Edgar, and there are no mortgages.
Okay, now explain who that was that
this was the FOIA attorney that is the attorney to Jane Norberg of the SEC, and he is tasked with doing the FOIA request.
Okay, so here we have the man in charge of doing the FOIA requests who goes and accesses the Edgar database and finds nothing in the Edgar database to show a mortgage on this school, Perry High School. But yet when you go into the mortgage database of MINS in MERS, what did you find?
It has multiple active mortgages, and I do not have that audit
That's
in front
okay.
of me. It is on Whistleblower's Diary. But I found this on other schools, the Los Angeles School District. I've done very quick audits on many of their schools. They have active mortgages, multiple active mortgages. The 3 courthouses in California that you know about that I audited also had more active.
By the 3 courthouses, we're talking now when I asked Renee to do an audit on Judge Carter and on the federal court building, I asked her to do an audit on the surrounding businesses and schools, and that's when the Santa Ana High School was pulled into this, and this started the chain reaction of these audits going across the country, because as we started pulling from the Santa Ana High School, Renee, explain just a little bit about what you found there.
Multiple active and inactive accounts. I mean, in many of them, all pulling from different versions of the address.
Again, the same pattern.
Right.
And that's Santa Ana High School. You can go into colleges, you can go into, and these audits are the foundation for the door to open to heal this massive Ponzi scheme. And it's such a massive Ponzi scheme that it will unravel all of this, and we will get our homes back. We will be paid damages because we have to be. We're going to conclude today's audits with courthouses. And the Ronald Reagan Court, federal court building in Orange County shares MIN numbers, for instance, as you discussed in your declaration, your affidavit at the beginning, with the Velvet Lounge Bar on the same street. Explain a little bit more about how, and for you and I know for me, is this a conflict of interest for this court to be even representing assistance to MERS? Any of these cases, if you have a conflict of interest and your courthouse itself is leveraged with hidden transactions in MERS, how can there not be a conflict of interest with a bias?
Well, wait a minute. You remember that when we first did this audit, and that was, I believe it was Exhibit KK in your case, right, of Santa Ana, my audit on Santa Ana. There were only 2 mortgages on the Ronald Reagan building, and we just did it like a couple weeks ago, and there were 17.
Correct. It's changed.
So it's changed,
and we find increasing. Also, what we found changed on my property, something that wasn't there before. On January 25th, 2008, Select Portfolio Servicing now is claiming a MERS MIN number on my property, my Ortega house. And in January 2008, now the 49 state attorney general settlement that Eric Holder was the foundation of getting started. Now, mind you, remember, Eric Holder was given evidence of all of this counterfeit securities through another acquaintance I have who gave a report that ended up on the desk of a friend of his and calling him saying, why am I getting your name, a document with your name on it? Eric Holder came in and threw it on her desk. Fix it. He then pulled the 49 state settlement and lawsuit, which was a farce because it settled, again, without homeowners or property owners or those whose identity have been stolen even protected and taken care of. This 49 state attorney general settlement, Eric Schneiderman in 2011 couldn't figure out why he wasn't getting traction with this. And then he realized that he had to pull the insurance into it. And insurance ends up paying. So this Ponzi scheme and hamster wheel of fraud and RICO involves everything right from the foundation of the county recorder's office, as in like Kamala Harris, who was the oversight of the secure recordation system, of which we reported in 2013 the recordings were wrong and being done in fraud. She did not do her job of oversight, and yet she correlated right into what Obama was doing, which was laundering the GSEs, which is our stolen homes, through hundreds, 500 billion through the Treasury, 500 billion through Freddie and Fannie, and through HUD. So These MERS MIN numbers are not only important because of hidden transactions, but because of the fact that it's hundreds of trillions of dollars being taken overseas. And so courthouses, federal court building, finish up with that, Renee.
Well, if you remember, we had done a couple different directions on the street. Was it south and north, or east or west? Well, we tried different versions and we got all kinds of different things. And this also feeds into cemeteries. I've done.
And cemeteries is what she's talking about, because headstones are also given situs. And not only that, but who is buried in the ground there under the ground. Another identity is being created on that situs. So go ahead, cemeteries.
Yeah, so I found multiple cemeteries throughout the country that have active mortgages on them.
Mm-hmm. And each plot in a cemetery will be a different situs. And cell towers, the reason that's so key to Powers versus Bank of New York Mellon is because I do have a cell tower on my property. And in 2009, a survey was done on the property by one Garcia, Mr. Garcia. And yet when I found out that that survey was being done and something wasn't right, because I contacted the cell tower company, said, look, this survey came in, this guy slapped markers up my driveway, in my paved driveway, slammed markers in my driveway, defacing my driveway. And it took 20 feet in on my property all the way across the cell tower. Well, the cell tower company didn't care. They didn't help. I contacted them. I said, you got to step in and help. Well, what happened was in 2013, I found, went down to the county records when I was removing my situs, and I pulled the tax roll. And what it showed was that 1.63 acres was missing from my property. I presented it to, they said, hey, something's wrong. Oh, no, you don't own that. It was, and I said, no. We backed up. It involved all of the departments there. My property had to be put back properly, but it was going straight over the cell tower. And what I now know is that was a perfect utility easement all the way down that side of my property, over my well and the cell tower. And Ron Tippett, who was the head of one of the departments there, met with myself and another very well-known homeowner advocate, and admitted to me that had I have not caught that happening, that in 2016, because you have to go, you go in 2015, they would have had a prescriptive easement over that property for utilities. So when my hell started was when I started confronting the cell tower company for damages being done to my property, and gave them a cease and desist, in which I then found they had no legal contract with me. But yet again, another judge, who we will do an audit on, allowed them to take easement where I didn't even have one to give. So the courthouses are key, because you have the county recorders, then you have the courthouses, the judges, the law enforcement agencies, you have the schools, you have every aspect of buildings related to conflict of interest stealing our homes. The last thing I want to mention here before we close, and that means you finish up, Renee, with just a closing statement, and then I'll shut this off. Novation transactions. This is a key for our investigators who are watching this. Pull up novation transactions and what it means, because as other whistleblowers have come forward, such as Ken Dost and Carol Keene, regarding MERS, MERS Corp, MERS trademarks and agreements, purchase agreements, etc., the fact that when the patent is under Sharia compliance requirements into the land records, it is a requirement for transparency. So in order for any transaction under novation transactions, which these patents and trademarks are tied to be legitimate, they have to be disclosed. So what have we just told through this whole audit of records and through this declaration is that we are finding the hidden transactions that are not recorded into the land records. So how can we have any standing for any of these companies, because they are doing so much in fraud, counterfeit securities, counterfeiting, pirating, and treason. And this is on the high seas because of our US citizenry. And that is what UCC law, anyone that knows what high seas means comprehends this is of the highest level. Faith Brashears has laid this out eloquently in Brashear versus the United States. I have whistleblower Jane Doe laying out the 1933 bankruptcy banking act and coming forward with 35 years of experience. She herself knows of these MERS audits, knows of these crimes. We have countless whistleblowers across this country who have come together, hundreds of interested parties into these first impression cases. Renee, I cannot thank you enough for what you are doing and for the partnership that's been and relationship that we have formed here. We have never met in person, nor have I met any of these other people that we are dealing with across this country. I have met some of these judges. I have met some of these public servants. We have Congresswoman Waters, who we also have done an audit on, and Renee has. We're not going to go into that audit today. But what do you call her audit? Interesting.
I don't know how to explain that one, but I will say it is a corner lot.
Very, very fair. So we can say that there may be some of these public servants, as Renee had found in one, she's previous attorney general, who had no clue all of this was on his property. So do we have public servants who believe that they're saving their retirements, their homes, their families' inheritance by allowing our homes to be stolen? We have proof out of Florida by a sitting judge on testimony in a case stating that the judges in Florida were told to fast track these foreclosures or forget about their pay raises or their retirements. Fact. Material fact. Material facts are what lead to jury, not these judges who have MERS conflict of interest, who are excluding our material and information and evidence and going with the bias towards these debt collectors, foreclosure mills, insurance companies, investors, when in fact we the people, we the homeowner, are the buy, sell, sell, buy, the buyer and the seller. The transaction starts and ends with us, and through our wet signature, that promissory note is traded, but we get no value in return. That's banking fraud 101. Derivatives created with all these situs manipulations. And Warren Buffett clearly stated that derivatives were the mother, Moab of finances, the mother of all bombs. So, Renee, we have given enough evidence here and enough preponderance of evidence going forward that this not only must be investigated, but indictments, arrests must be brought down on those involved in all of these transactions, stealing our land, home, and lives. And again, I'm declaring under penalty of perjury that everything I'm bringing forward and speaking of here today is the truth as I know it, is the evidence as we find it, is proprietary. And yet, we investors, we actual investors, are being usurped. Renee, go ahead and close us out, and then I'll end.
Bruce had to hang up, but that is something we will have to save for another day because it's something that we need to add in there.
Yes, Bruce Holloway has a story about meeting the owner of MERS that is very interesting. And again, we will bring that forward in a separate video and introduce that to you. But go ahead, Renee. Tell us what we've told them. Tell us why we told it and close us.
Well, I'm going to leave you with this. I just sent a FOIA request to the FBI in Virginia asking for the FBI to investigate the two agents, Thomas Wrights and Larry Stewart. I want to know what they did with our investigations.
And that's where I've done an affidavit of truth and fact relating to Thomas Ritz, and to explain, oh my gosh, excuse me, my sinuses are acting up, but to explain why I feel not only has he committed dereliction of duty, but has obstructed justice. And I hear from people, as you do all across this country, asking, how come they're not investigating? Well, these audits may very well be the answer. They're not investigating because they're so invested in us not winning that it's created such a conflict of interest that no public servant has been untouched. Does that mean all of them go to prison? Well, those who come forward first usually are given the best sentences from what I hear. So Congresswoman Waters has come forward. And I want to explain here that I had a conversation with Jack about this and said, you know, Jack, here we've got all of this information Renee and I are bringing forward, all these other whistleblowers, our big whistleblower from McCarthy and Holthus. But the people who are supposed to be our congressmen and women who are to help us, so many of them have indictments themselves for having laundered money or abused financial campaign money, or like in Congressman Levin's case in San Juan Capistrano here. He's an attorney for Brian Cave, who is one of the biggest foreclosure mills in the country. How can he be unbiased? He works for the company. So his own father almost lost a home with alleged origination with Countrywide, but somehow his daddy's home got saved. But going forward, we have to hold our public servants accountable to do their job. So what are we doing? We are investigating the investigators.
Exactly.
And thank you so much, Renee. We're going to end this. Go ahead. Do you have anything else to finish up? Nope. Okay. Well, this is going to be going to Jack. I'm also going to be putting it on YouTube, but we will not be giving links to our evidence other than to law enforcement at this time. At a later date, we may be adding it to the YouTube link. Heather Singleton's declaration will be in there. Ken Doss' work, Carol Keene's work, I will be placing in there. That our proprietary information on these audits will be going to law enforcement as needed. Okay?
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.